Hello guys, welcome to Garden Theory. Today, I wanted to talk about how to design annuals and how to show how you can do it yourself for your own home or property. And so I'm going to be showing you the way that I like to design annuals. And since we're getting towards that time of year, I thought we would design a fall annual plan together. And I'm going to be using a design method that I learned in school called the Mountain Meadow Design Philosophy. And if you want to learn more about that, I did a whole video talking about that. So you're welcome to watch that later. But I'm going to just review how I organize and design annual flowers. And so the main route of how I design things, as you see here, I'm going to be using this Excel spreadsheet for today's video. But I separate my annuals into three categories: skeleton, tendon, and flesh. And so essentially what these are, the skeleton are your focal point, your more showy, usually tall or bigger flowers that draw the most attention. And then your tendon plants are those that complement the skeleton, but don't overpower it, but are usually a really good filler plant to go along with it. And then the flesh is everything else that's going to fill in our space. And so the main percentages that I try to go for on these ones is to be around 15% on the skeleton, around 20 to 30% on the tendon, and at least around 40 to 80% on the flesh. So that's how I organize it into a very naturalistic design. And by following those basic principles, you're able to create a really nice organic flowing shape of a design. So we're just going to start off. So since we're in this time of year in the fall and people start getting ready to plant things like pansies and flower bulbs and stuff like that, we're going to go through this. And so when I think of really good skeleton plants for the fall, and again, this might depend on where you live and what you can plant, what survives in your local area. But for a more warmer climate, snapdragons do really good in the fall. They can usually overwinter pretty good depending on your climate again. So things like snapdragons work really well to add some height into your design. Going down to tendon, just as an example, a good tendon plant that I found works really good is dianthus. Using it as a winter annual, it does a really good job as a filler and adding kind of a bit of a grassy nice green texture to your otherwise kind of pretty bright and predominant bright flowers in the fall. So I think dianthus does really good. And then for a few examples for flesh, pansies and their smaller cousin violas both do a really good job as a flesh plant in the fall. But you can also use certain pansies and violas as a tendon depending on their color. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment. Going into bulbs, we'll list a few bulbs, but pretty much any bulbs are going to be very skeleton heavy. But again, depending on what colors you're using, they can be skeleton and tendon as well as flesh. We'll put. Although I think for this example, we're just going to use them as skeleton and tendon. So that's our basic framework. Now we haven't decided any varieties or any colors, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So I pulled up a color wheel, and this is how I like to design things. So, when we're in the design phase, we don't have the plants in front of us. So sometimes it can be a little challenging to figure out, oh, what colors do I want to try? That's going to look good against maybe the color of my house. And so having a color wheel, and you can get like a printout version of this that you can play with. But even just looking something like this online is very helpful. So typically, um, for the best contrast with your colors, doing primary and complementary colors are your best option. So yellow is to purple, as blue is to orange, and green is to red. So those are going to be your most stark contrast. And typically in flower arranging, I see that people like to do purple and yellow as the easiest ones to do. Blue and orange can be a little tricky sometimes, and red and green can feel a little Christmassy. And so a lot of times what you can do is when you're doing, say your skeleton is a yellow flower, you can go to the side of your complementary color. So instead of doing purple flowers as your contrast, you can do more blue and red flowers. And that creates that triangle image. And so that's something you can do. So you can do the same thing with doing orange with more purple and green, and doing anything within, going back to our yellow, anything between the blue and the red, you do these five colors as the rest of your flowers, and that can be one way to design your flowers. The other way is if you want to have your center point be yellow, do things from green to orange and have everything be the same instead of having one contrasting color. So there's a lot of different ways you can use these color relationships to create natural contrast and emphasis on things. And so that's something we're going to consider when we're doing our design phase. So with snapdragons, one of my favorite snapdragons, we're going to do some yellow snapdragons. And we're also going to do some red kale. That's a really good skeleton plant in the fall. Let's see. How about we actually change this to red? Let's do a red snapdragon and some red kale. Now, even though this kale is red, it's typically more of this color, a purple, like a violet red, or red violet, I mean. And so that gives us a bit of contrast, and those red snapdragons are usually a pretty solid bright red. And so if we have these two, we could maybe add some red tulips. We can also add some pink tulips for a bit of a variation on the red. So now we kind of have this kind of range for our skeleton. So our natural contrast is going to be a green to yellow. And so a good tendon plant, a lot of times you can have something that contrasts really nicely as your tendon. They can also have things that pair with your colors. So having some red and purple dianthus will help complement those skeleton plants. And then looking back at our color wheel, we know that anywhere from green to yellow is going to be a good color. And sometimes that's hard to get as a flower, but we can use some yellow pansies as our contrast to that more purple kale. And then for violas, we can do some purple violas. Or maybe let's just do yellow. Let's stick with the yellow theme for now, if I can spell. And then for tulips, we can do, let's do some yellow daffodils instead. Okay, so now we're starting to shape up. So now we're looking at, let me get the highlighter and showcase what kind of colors we're going to be dealing with. And sometimes using the highlighter can be a good way to visualize the colors if you're having a hard time. So, we're mostly red, so we could probably use a little bit of green as well, which is kind of a tough one to get. We're going on with our flesh. So since we have predominantly red and yellow colors, we might want to do some more blue as our flesh, just to kind of give us a little bit more of a rounded feel. So we're going to grab us a few of these purple and blue violas and pansies. We're also going to do some hyacinths as part of our flesh. We could do some grape hyacinths, which are a pretty good small flower. I'm sure if that's how you spell hyacinth, but and then we can do some purple crocus as well. That's looking pretty good, but we can also mix in a few white. I think white sometimes works really good with the purples and the blues. So let's add some white violas and some white pansies. So now we're looking more, so they're probably going to be like this shade of blue, and then pretty rich. I'll just do that. These are more of a blue purple. I'm not sure if I have the best color for that. So uh, now that we got all of our colors in here, we can kind of see we have a very warm skeleton and tendon with a very cool colored flesh. So now that we have our basic color scheme, and again, you can do whatever color scheme that you want. You can keep it just to two colors. You can do it monocolored, so everything's the same color. I find with naturalistic, it's good to have a variety of different colors. That way things kind of mesh and flow a bit nicer together. When you have everything the same color, it looks a bit more formal, but having a variety of different colors as well as different textures of as many flowers as you can, the more naturalistic it's going to look. But having a solid color scheme in mind is going to help us to reduce the messiness of the look. But before we get into that, we're going to be talking about how do we know how many plants do I need in my space. So for our project, we're going to say that we have 200 square feet of space. Now, it's very important to measure your space accurately when you're in your design phase. And it helps if your space is more of a formal shape, but if it's a bit of a loose shape, just do the best you can at measuring it. For this example, we're going to use 200 square feet. And so we know for most of these, besides probably the kale will probably space at least 1 foot apart, maybe more. I like to do annuals a little tight, and with pansies and violas, you can kind of do those two for every square foot. And so since we know that we want 15%, so that means you can take your square footage and times it by 0.15. So that's how many square footage you're going to be filling with skeleton. So with bulbs and pansies, I treat it a little differently than I would my summer flowers. So we're going to give the same square footage to the tulips as well as the pansies because the tulips are going to be underneath our pansies and they're going to come up in the spring. So we're not going to divide this in two between the tulips and the pansies. We're going to treat it as the same, if that makes sense, because they're both going to go into the same space. And so since we have two annuals, we know that's 15 square feet. So we can get 15 kale. And since we're going to plant these snapdragons, 2 per square foot, that's 30 snapdragons. Hopefully this is working. I'm not sure why it wouldn't be. Oh, it's because we haven't added the others. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing. So for tulips, I just do the same spacing, 2 per square foot when I have them mixed with the pansies. I know I've seen some sites recommend 3 to 4 per square foot. I'm just going to do two for the example. And that seems to be enough if you have pansies and other things mixed in there already. It seems like they fill it in fine, at least for me. But that's on personal preference. If you want to do 3 per square foot, we're just going to do 15 times 3. But for this example, we're just going to do 2 per square foot. So that gives us the number of tulip bulbs that we're going to need. And so now moving on to the tendon, we're going to try to go for 30% of this. So we times it by 0.3, and that gives us 60 square foot. Um, so for this, since we only have one bulb, we already know that's going to be 120. Oh, I see. I need to make these into the percentages. There we go. I'll fix this one too. There we go. And then since we have 3, we're going to do 60 divided by 3. Oh, got to do that. So that gives us 20 square feet. And so since we're doing these 2 per square foot, that makes these all 40. So I hope you're following along. I hope I'm not going too fast for everyone. We're going to do the flesh next. And so since we use 15 and what was it, 20? Or did I do 30? I think I did 30, didn't I? It's 30. That gives us 45%. So that means we're going to be 55% on our flesh. So we're going to times that by 55, and that gives us 110 square feet. And we have two bulbs between that. So 110 divided by 2 is 55 square feet, which means we're going to do 110. And for the crocus, I'm actually going to do those 3 per square feet since they're a little smaller. We could do that with the grapes, but I'm just going to do that for the crocus since they're a little smaller. That's 165. Now with their 55 square feet, we're going to, oh no, sorry. So now we're going to take that 110 that we decided will be for our flesh, and we have 1, 2, 3, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different annuals. That's about 18 square feet per each one. And then 18 times 2 is 36. So, oops, we're just going to do 36 on all of these. And the reason why these percentages are a little different is because we did a little extra of the purple crocus. So that gives us a total annuals and bulbs of 872, which is a little high for, oh, but that's because we have the bulbs in there. So if we're not counting the bulbs, so let's just remove the bulbs for a second so we can just look at our flowers. So that's 417 total annuals going into 200 square feet of space. So that's just slightly over 2 per square foot. So that's going to help us create a really nice full bed. That's going to be that looks relatively full on install, but will fill in still over time and create a really nice arrangement for everything. We add all of our bulbs back, and so we're pretty much doing 400 bulbs and 400 flowers. And so that's essentially how I design annual flowers. And this was a pretty rushed example. If you want to do a bit more research into what works best in your local area, I'd recommend doing that first. I find typically that violas do better than pansies, so you could just do violas, but I still think it's good to have a decent mix of as many things as you can just to add to that naturalistic style. And so going on to when we are going to be planting these, let me see if I can open up this old MS Paint program just to draw on something. When we have a flower bed, say this is our flower bed. So this is our 200 square feet working with the mouse, but we have 200 square feet in this space. So when we're designing our flowers, we want to try to use naturalistic shapes. So some that I like to use are shapes like the letter 3. You can do a sine curve. You can also do like the letter C, any kind of naturalistic shape. So let's say for this bed, we're going to do something like this. So we have something that goes like that. So that is our skeletal line, and that's where we're going to be placing all of our skeleton plants, right? Which were all mostly red. So we're going to place all these guys all around this line. And I like to place them in scaling triangles, which is like this. So you have two that are close and one that's far away. And so it makes this scaling triangle. And so we're going to place it just like that all along our line. And we just go like that. And we're just going to go all along the line, placing them in these pairings. And let's see, we have a couple purple kale, so we can just add some. Let me see, how many do we have? We had 15. So there's our purple kale mixed with our red dianthus and tulips and stuff. And then majority of our skeleton, and we place those one on the line and then two off. So again, placing in groups of 3, we place one on the line and two off. So we kind of expand the line just like this. And so we had a couple of red. So oops, wrong color. So we'll add a few red out around here. Right. And so this is a very loose drawing, but now we're going to move on to our flesh, which is mostly purple and blues. And I put these in big patches, typically between 5 and 20 of the same thing in a patch. So we're just going to throw these in here. They're going to fill in all of these little spaces left over by our skeleton and tendon plants. And so by the end, this is kind of what we're looking like. It creates something really natural. We're going to use naturalistic shapes when we're placing things. But just by doing that, that helps to create a naturalistic form inside your flower bed. So there's a bit of formality to it, but you're still sticking to a naturalistic approach. Um, and throughout this video, I'll show a few examples of different places that use this design. But I find it as a really good way to have something naturalistic that doesn't look too messy. I know this is just MS Paint, so it doesn't look super good on this, but this is just an example. That's essentially how I like to go about designing annuals. I do most of it on Excel. And while I'm going, I'll do research. If I want to try red kale, I'm doing all the research into it. I'm trying to figure out what's going to do the best, what varieties do the best. So I try to do as much research as I can beforehand, but that's essentially what I do. And hope you found this video useful. Again, if you'd like to learn more about the history of the Mountain Meadow design, who created it, and a little bit more about it, go watch this video. I'll have it linked at the end of this. But with that, I hope y'all have a great rest of y'all's day.